The world of Dark Souls stops feeling like Dark Souls the moment Ornstein and Snow fall and the Lord Vessel is placed in your hands. But after this, the downfall of Dark Souls is observed in a never-ending spiral. The meticulous, almost surgical design of the early game is replaced by rushed development. Carefully constructed navigation and world interconnectivity are discarded in favor of fast travel. Enemy placement becomes increasingly arbitrary, most notably in areas like Lost Izalith. The Tomb of the Giants relies on mechanical gimmicks rather than spatial or encounter design, and the Bed of Chaos abandons the series' core combat philosophy entirely, replacing skill and observation with randomness and repetition. Together, these choices mark the beginning of Dark Souls' structural and experiential decline. What would have been a masterpiece literally ran out of time. To understand why this shift feels so jarring, we have to look at the bones of the world and where they started to become brittle. Before we can talk about where the game hollows, we have to understand the magic of its heartbeat. In the first half of Dark Souls, the game doesn't talk to you through tutorials or waypoint markers. It speaks through the environment. It is an intuitive teacher. Think back to your first arrival. Most games would have a level icon over the top of the skeletons or block the path with an invisible wall. But in Dark Souls, you have access to them right from the get-go. Within seconds, you are slaughtered. There is no pop-up. The game's difficulty is simply communicated through the sharp cold reality of a blade. And after repeated attempts, you realize that this is not the way to progress. Another way from the shrine would be the elevator down to New Londo Ruins. But there you are, immediately humbled by ghosts that you can't even damage yet, leaving the only option being the undead Berg. This is the first lesson in the language of the land. The world isn't just a backdrop, it's a set of physical rules you have to learn. Every enemy, every boss, is meticulously placed and added to bring out the experience. The verticality of the undead Berg isn't just for show. It's designed to reward your observation. When you see an archer busy sniping you from the back, you don't look for a button to press. You look for a way to reach him. When you see a dragon on a bridge, you are solving a puzzle of timing and cover. You aren't just moving through a level. You are learning the how and why of a physical space. By the time you reach the descent into Blighttown, the game has taught you its most brutal lesson: commitment. In most modern titles, the hub is a menu click away. But here, every step down into that poisonous dark feels heavy, because it's a step away from safety. There is no return to hub button. There is only the long, grueling walk back up. This creates a sense of physical weight, a realization that you are deep in the gut of the world, and the only way out is through. This feeling of being trapped is exactly why the world feels so vast. It's not about the square mileage of the map. It's about the emotional distance between you and the last bonfire. You feel like a scavenger in the ruins of gods, because the world is physically bigger than your ability to easily traverse it. All of these factors are the intuitive teaching, the brutal commitment, and the geographical miracle, which all build towards a single blinding crescendo: Anno Londo. This is the peak of the climb. To get here, you survived a gauntlet that demanded you master the game's language. The reward isn't just the view, it's the confrontation. Everything in Anno Londo is better than the lower levels. The bosses are epic, and the area feels grand and majestic. Defeating Ornstein and Smough was the last portion of this ascent. It is arguably the most challenging hurdle in the game so far, and overcoming it feels like you finally earned your seat among the gods. But as you hold the Lord Vessel, the crescendo hits its final note, and then the music changes. If one were to poll the pilgrims of Lordran on where the path begins to crumble, they would not point to a mechanic or a narrative choice. They would point to a place that is specific: Lost Izalith. This is the crime scene of the second half, the definitive proof of a production schedule that outpaced its creator's vision. Personally, I would sooner endure the chaotic ruins of Izalith than spend another hour in suffocating darkness of the Tomb of the Giants. But let us be candid. That is akin to comparing a lingering headache to the agonizing fever of a plague. Both are afflictions. One is merely more tolerable than the other, yet one would wish to never suffer either again. The first indication of this decline is the peculiar density of its adversaries. While other Lord Souls are guarded by singular iconic figures, Izalith subjects the player to 4. It is a classic case where quantity is used to mask a startling lack of quality. Lost Izalith is a massive area, open and wide, and the stuff placed there is a total nightmare to deal with. It begins with ceaseless discharge. Though his lore is tragic, and his purposeful cheese remains a legendary act of environmental storytelling, the encounter itself is a mechanical shadow of a fight that lacks the rhythmic precision found earlier in the journey. Once the fires recede and you step into the ruins proper, the anatomy of a deadline becomes impossible to ignore. You are immediately confronted by a phalanx of Taurus demons. Reusing an early game boss as a standard foe is an establishing trope intended to showcase the player's growth, but the placement here is utterly devoid of grace. In the undead burg, every hollow was positioned with surgical, deliberate intent. Here, they stand in a rigid, nonsensical line in an open field, as if frozen in a developer's testing suite. It does not feel like a lived-in ruin. It feels like an unfinished stage where assets were placed simply to fill a void. Then, we encounter the demon Fire Sage. While the Taurus and Capra demons might have received a stay of execution, this beast does not. He is the third iteration of the very first boss the player encountered, reskinned in a burning orange hue. His moveset is a carbon copy of the Stray Demon. He represents a profound waste of the player's time, a speed bump placed mere moments before another boss gate. This leads us to the Centipede Demon. This encounter is a failure of both aesthetics and mechanics. Visually, it is a chaotic mess of limbs where one cannot discern the head from the tail. The arena is perhaps the most hostile in the game, forcing the player to wrestle with the camera or perish in the health-draining magma. It is not a test of martial skill, but a test of one's patience against a malfunctioning environment. Yet, the pinnacle of this rushed tragedy is the lava fields themselves. The texture is a repetitive tiled disaster that sears the eyes of the viewer. The fields are empty, and there is nothing significant in those fields. The only thing placed there are the dragon legs, the bound demons. They possess massive health and deal immense damage. Yet, there is no reason to engage them. In the first half of the game, every enemy was a hurdle to be cleared and rewarded some form of compensation that was worth the trouble you fought for. But here, they are merely obstacles to be ignored. I do not conquer Izalith. I simply run through it to find the exit. If Lost Izalith is the crime scene of a rushed production, then the Tomb of the Giants, the Duke's Archives, and New Londo are suspects of this crime. In the first half of Lordran, the philosophy followed, if it's too difficult, look elsewhere. But in the Tomb of the Giants, the fairness is masked by the use of cheap gimmicks and unnecessary gear. The game abruptly stops teaching and starts demanding. By stripping away the player's sight, the environment is no longer a tool for navigation. It becomes a mechanical hurdle that requires a specific item to bypass. This is not a test of martial prowess, but a test of gear. To illuminate this abyss, one must either possess a specific sorcery from a hidden NPC, a helm found in a secret corridor of another late-game area, or sacrifice their defensive capability to hold a lantern. These are not rewards for cleverness. They are gear checks that halt the pacing of the adventure. The enemy placement further betrays the game's earlier fairness. Skeleton beast monstrosities with erratic high damage strikes ambush the player from the dark, often leading to deaths that feel unearned. In the early game, a death felt like a personal failure of observation. Here, falling into a bottomless pit because you couldn't see the floor feels like a failure of the world's design. This lack of vision masks a startling lack of design. The area is essentially a linear path, devoid of the clever loops that made the first half a masterpiece. There are no shortcuts connecting the depths of the tomb back to the surface. Instead, you are forced into a singular, punishing descent, where the long walk becomes a tedious slog through a featureless void. Then there is New Londo, a place that captures the atmospheric alienation perfectly, yet fails in almost every other structural aspect. This is the only late-game trial accessible from the very moment you arrive at Firelink, but its requirements remain unnecessarily cryptic. The primary adversaries, the ghosts, ignore the physical rules the game spent hours establishing. They strike through solid stone, reaching through floors and walls to drag you into the abyss. But the true transgression of New Londo is the absence of sanctuary. New Londo offers no bonfire, not one. In the early game, the discovery of a bonfire felt like a holy reprieve, a hard-earned reward for surviving a gauntlet. In New Londo, that relief never comes. Should you perish while attempting to drain the city, you are forced into a repetitive transit from Firelink Shrine, riding that agonizingly slow elevator time and time again. It is a world that has forgotten how to reward the player's persistence. The moment of enlightenment you felt when the lift from the parish returned you to Firelink is replaced here by the tedium of backtracking. Even the shortcut provided is a hollow gesture. It is a mere ledge to drop from, still requiring a lengthy, dangerous trek past dark wraiths and across narrow walkways. New Londo's design doesn't feel like an architectural miracle. It feels like a marathon designed to test your patience rather than your mastery. Even the Duke's Archives, arguably the most polished of these final stages, suffers from a loss of structural integrity. It is a grand crystalline prison, yet it replaces the geographical miracle of the early game with mechanical distractions. The shifting staircases are a marvel of animation, but they serve as a gimmick to mask a level that is essentially a linear climb. The problem continues into the crystal caves. While aesthetically striking, the invisible pathways are the antithesis of the Berg's verticality. You are no longer observing architecture, you are guessing at the existence of a flaw. It is a trial and error exercise that feels disconnected from the martial mastery the game demanded hours prior. Furthermore, the trek back to the final confrontation is an exercise in futility. A 2-minute walk across empty crystalline fields with no shortcut to bridge the gap. In the first half of the game, every path eventually led you back to the heart of the world. In the second half, every path ends in a literal and metaphorical dead end. The world has ceased to be a Rubik's Cube of logic. It has become a series of 4 straight lines, extending into a void where the designers simply ran out of time to build a bridge back home. The decay of Lordran is not merely architectural. It is reflected in the very souls that guard its shards. If Ornstein and Smo represented the absolute zenith of the game's mechanical language, a dual test of positioning, timing, and strategy, the lords that follow are shadows. They are the hollow guardians, victims of a design philosophy that traded rhythmic mastery for dirty difficulty, tedious runbacks, and broken gimmicks. Take the 4 kings. This isn't a battle of martial skill. It's a damage race. The difficulty doesn't come from a complex moveset, but from a stopwatch. If you cannot deplete one king's health before the next spawns, the fight transforms into a gank of infinite shadows. There is no clever use of the environment, no pillars to hide behind, no verticality to exploit. It is a raw numbers game that forces you to abandon the careful progression of the early game and simply unga bunga your way through with the heaviest armor possible. And let us speak of the trek back to this void. Whether you descend from Firelink Shrine or the Drake Valley, the journey is an exercise in frustration. You are forced to sacrifice a vital ring slot just to survive the fall into the arena, which is a mechanical tax that limits your build. Then we have Seath the Scaleless. For a dragon of such legendary status, the fight is pitifully easy. Once you shatter the crystal, the obvious hit this to win signpost, the dragon becomes a stationary target. You spend the entire fight chasing a tail that clips through the geometry of the room. He is too large for this area. His movements are clumsy, and he offers none of the physical reality we felt when fighting other larger bosses. But the true ordeal is the run back. The trek from the Duke's archives to the Crystal Caves is perhaps the most egregious in the game. It is a nearly 2-minute walk across invisible pathways and empty fields. In a game series known for its clever shortcuts, where's the bridge here? There are no enemies to challenge you, no shortcuts to unlock. There is only the anatomy of a deadline, a long, empty distance meant to pad the time. Gravelord Nito suffers from a similar lack of grace. The fight begins with unavoidable fall damage, a dirty difficulty spike that forces the player to heal before the battle even starts. It is a cramped encounter where the difficulty is artificial, relying on respawning skeletons to distract you from Nito's unlimited moveset. Nito is the definition of dirty design. To combat his subordinates, you are forced to bring a divine weapon, a detail buried in cryptic dialogue, or face an endless tide of bone. It feels less like a duel with a god of death and more like a chaotic brawl in a dark closet. Even his Deathwave attack can hit you from across the room when you can't even see him. It's a fight against the environment as much as the boss. And finally, we must address the Bed of Chaos. Oh boy, it is the ultimate betrayal of the game's language. In the Undead Burg, the environment was your teacher. Here, it is your executioner. It is a platforming puzzle in a game that was never built for platforming. The run back is a masterpiece of frustration. Even if you find the hidden bonfire in the lava, you must still sprint across the eye-searing tiles, take off your lava walking ring, put on your combat gear, and pray that the boss's RNG doesn't sweep you into a pit the moment you enter. And also, there is a shortcut to the boss that is so obscure and cryptic that no one would make it. The Chaos Covenant shortcut allows a player to bypass the centipedes and the fire sages entirely. Yet the requirement to open it, offering 30 humanities, is not something anyone would sacrifice for without knowing the rewards up front. There is no triumph in defeating it, only a sense of relief that the inconvenient obstacle is finally out of your way. It is a boss that saves your progress upon death, a silent admission that the designers knew the fight was a failure. Even Gwyn, the final god, feels like a missed opportunity. While the atmosphere is hauntingly beautiful, he can be entirely trivialized by a single mechanic: the parry. After a game that taught you that bosses are titanic, unstoppable forces, the final challenge can be ended in seconds by a move you haven't been required to use once against a lord. And yet again, the game demands one last long walk. The run to Gwyn through the kiln is a long sprint past a handful of black knights. For a fight that can end in 30 seconds if you miss a single parry, the distance is insulting. It is a final lingering stutter in a world that has run out of breath. When you receive the Lord Vessel, the game introduces fast travel. On the surface, it feels like a reprieve from the grueling treks through poisonous swamps and trapped fortresses. But this convenience comes at a devastating cost. It fractures the game's internal logic. This is the moment where the soul of the map dies. The developers spent countless of hours on the intricate surgical placement of shortcut elevators or a hidden ladder that bypassed a deadly trap. In the first half, the map was the antagonist. In the second half, the map is just a menu. Until this point, the world was a tangled, cohesive web. You knew where you were because you had to walk there. You felt the distance in your bones. You understood the physical relationship between the suffocating depths of Brighttown and the sun-drenched spires of Anor Londo, because you traversed every grueling inch between them. You knew every lock, every enemy placement, and every safe corner, because you had no other choice. This wasn't just navigation, it was intimacy. You lived in Lordran, the impossible feat of level design, where everything folded in on itself, is traded for a cheap way to mask the lack of interconnectedness in the second half. The Metroidvania masterpiece is lobotomized. It becomes 4 disconnected hallways on a wheel. This shift fundamentally changes your relationship with the environment. You no longer have to commit. In the first half, going down into the Great Hollow or the depths was a terrifying descent into the unknown. If you went too far, you had to fight your way back out. Now, that weight, the physical reality of your decisions, evaporates. If things get too hard, you just teleport to safety. The stakes have been deleted. The immersion breaks because the world stops feeling like a lived-in ruin and starts feeling like an unfinished level. We've moved from the height of creative inspiration to the cold reality of production schedules. The golden fog didn't just hide the lords. It hid the fact that the paths leading to them were crumbling under the pressure of a looming release date. The environment wasn't just a backdrop. It was a weight you carried. When you reached the bottom of that swamp, the realization hit you. I have to climb back out. That trek up the Firelink was a pilgrimage of survival. It reinforced the scale of the world. But with the Lord Vessel, that weight is lifted, and in its place is a vacuum. You no longer inhabit Lordran. You are merely a tourist visiting its landmarks. The Lord Vessel didn't just break the world's physical connectivity. It broke the player's spatial awareness. You stop looking into the horizon to find your way. You look at a menu. The design of the 4 Lord Paths feels like a collection of DLCs rather than a cohesive world. Because the developers knew you could warp, they stopped worrying about how these areas felt in relation to one another. The Duke's Archives is a literal glass box at the edge of the world. The Tomb of the Giants is a dead-end hole. New Londo is a flooded basement with no exit but the boss room. These aren't parts of a living city. They are isolated challenge rooms. Finally, we witnessed the visual hollowing. In the Berg, every brick felt placed by hand. In Izalith, you can see the copy-paste tool at work. The enemy placement isn't a combat encounter. It is a barricade meant to waste your time because the developers didn't have the months required to balance the encounters. The orange glow of the lava isn't atmospheric. It's a literal veil used to hide the lack of geometrical detail on the horizon. We are no longer playing the game Hidetaka Miyazaki dreamed of. We are playing the game the fiscal calendar allowed him to finish. The Lord Vessel is the moment the curtain is pulled back, revealing that the gods of Lordran and the developers themselves have simply run out of power. We are left wandering through the fragments of a dream that was cut short by a deadline. But buried beneath the shortcut geometry and the hollowed-out boss designs, there remains a different kind of spectacle. The strange fractured souls we meet along the way. These NPCs are more than just quest givers or vendors. They are bizarre, erratic, and operate on a logic that feels alien even to this dying world. They don't just exist to serve your journey, they exist to survive their own, often through laughter that sounds like a death rattle. If you've ever found these encounters more unsettling than the monsters themselves, if you've stood before a man in an onion-shaped suit or a golden knight with a silver tongue and felt that something was off, then you sensed the true heart of Lordran's madness. Step away from the ruins with me. Let's stop looking at the cracks in the walls and start looking at the cracks in the people. Because in a world that's falling apart, the NPCs in Dark Souls are weirder than you think.